Long before time was measured by clocks or kingdoms rose and fell under banners, there was an age when gods still walked the earth, when men dared to challenge fate, and legends were not born but made. In the sun-scorched lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, there lived a king who was not entirely mortal, nor entirely divine. His name was Gilgamesh, a name that would echo through the canyons of history as both a conqueror and a broken soul. His was a story of unmatched power, divine wrath, monstrous battles, and an eternal search for something even the gods feared, death itself. But this is no tale of triumph. This is the tragedy of a demigod who defied the heavens, lost everything he loved, and discovered that no throne, no temple, no mighty wall could protect him from the bitter truth that immortality was never meant for man. In the cradle of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia, there stood a city whose towering walls kissed the clouds and whose temples shimmered with golden sunlight. This city was Uruk, and its ruler, the mighty Gilgamesh, was no ordinary king. Born of the priest-king Lugalbanda and the goddess Nin's son, he was a demigod in flesh, towering above men in both stature and strength. His body carved like stone, his face radiant with divine beauty, Gilgamesh seemed like a living god, invincible, untouchable, eternal. But beneath the splendor of his temples and the elegance of his orchards, a darker truth festered. Gilgamesh, though mighty, was tyrannical. He demanded adoration, forced labor, and worst of all, claimed every bride before her wedding night, believing it his divine right. His people, once awed by his greatness, began to fear and resent him. Behind the high walls of Uruk, whispered prayers rose like smoke to the heavens, not for protection, but for liberation from their king. And the gods listened. High above, Anu, father of the heavens, heard the cries of mortals and felt a flicker of sympathy. He summoned Uruk, goddess of creation and vegetation, and gave her a singular task: to shape a being capable of standing against Gilgamesh. With divine hands and sacred clay, Uruk crafted a creature unlike any other, a man not born of royalty, but of wilderness. Enkidu. Enkidu was raw, wild, and untouched by civilization. His body was covered in thick hair like an animal, and horns curled from his head like a great bull. He ran with gazelles, drank from rivers beside lions, and guarded the forests as a protector of beasts. To the world of man, he was a savage, but to nature, he was king. When Gilgamesh heard rumors of a wild man as strong as himself roaming the plains, he grew intrigued and uneasy. Could this be the answer to his unchecked rule? To uncover the truth, he sent Shamhat, a sacred priestess of Uruk, to lure Enkidu away from the wild. She found him by the riverbank, and with the allure of civilization, wine, song, and seduction, she tamed the beast. For 7 days and 7 nights, Shamhat and Enkidu lay together, a sacred union of flesh and spirit. And in that time, something within Enkidu changed. He stood upright. He wore clothing. He ate bread and drank wine. The animals who once ran beside him now fled at his scent. He had become a man, and with that transformation came a purpose. Shamhat spoke of Gilgamesh, of his cruelty, his arrogance, his crimes. Enkidu listened, and something stirred in him: rage. When Enkidu arrived in Uruk, the city held its breath. It was the day of a royal wedding, and as was custom, Gilgamesh approached to claim the bride. But this time, a figure stepped forward from the crowd. Wild-haired, broad-shouldered, fire in his eyes, Enkidu blocked his path. "You shall not touch her," he growled. The crowd fell silent. Gilgamesh's eyes burned with fury. No man had ever dared defy him. Without a word, he lunged. And so began a battle unlike anything Uruk had ever seen. The demigod and the wild man collided with the force of two worlds clashing. Their fists cracked stone, their roars shook towers. For 7 days, they fought. A storm of fury, sweat, and blood. Entire buildings crumbled beneath their feet. It was as if the gods themselves had descended to wage war. But then, something strange happened. Respect. As they traded blows, neither yielding, a mutual admiration began to grow. These were not enemies. These were equals. On the 7th day, exhausted and bloodied, Gilgamesh struck the final blow that sent Enkidu crashing to the ground. But instead of delivering death, he extended a hand, and Enkidu took it. From that moment on, they were no longer rivals. They were brothers. With Enkidu at his side, Gilgamesh began to change. No longer did he torment his people or take what wasn't his. The tyrant became a protector, a just king who ruled with wisdom, and alongside Enkidu, he sought adventure, glory, and meaning beyond the gates of Uruk. Their first great test came in the form of a terrifying guardian, a demon named Humbaba, who watched over the sacred cedar forest. No mortal dared enter his domain, for he was said to breathe fire, his voice a storm, his gaze death itself. But Gilgamesh, driven by the hunger to leave behind a legacy, saw Humbaba as the ultimate challenge. Together, the brothers ventured into the forest. The trees grew so tall they blocked the sun, and the air buzzed with unnatural silence. Then he appeared. Humbaba was monstrous, a titan with a face twisted by ancient rage. For the first time since they had met, both Gilgamesh and Enkidu felt fear. But they did not run. Gilgamesh struck with his axe. Enkidu followed with his spear, and after a brutal battle, they slayed the demon. With his dying breath, Humbaba cursed them. "One of you," he hissed, "will not escape death, but curses are for later." The brothers returned to Uruk in triumph, heads high and hearts full. The people cheered. They were heroes, and among the cheering crowd was Ishtar, goddess of love and war. She was enthralled by Gilgamesh, his strength, his beauty, his power. She offered him riches, devotion, and divine pleasure. But Gilgamesh, remembering her many lovers who met cruel ends, refused. He rejected a goddess. Ishtar's beauty turned to fury. She ascended to the heavens and pleaded with her father, Anu, to unleash vengeance. Anu listened, and from the celestial vault he sent forth the bull of heaven, a creature so massive its steps caused earthquakes, its breath summoned famine. The bull descended upon Uruk, leaving destruction in its wake. Buildings collapsed, people starved, rivers bled dry. And once again the brothers rose. Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought with the fury of dying stars. They struck the bull's heart and brought it crashing to the earth. But their victory came at a price. The gods had had enough. For slaying two sacred beings, Humbaba and the bull, the gods decreed punishment. One must die, and it would be Enkidu. He fell ill slowly, painfully. The mighty wild man who once ran with lions now lay in bed, coughing blood, his limbs weak. Gilgamesh watched, helpless, as his brother faded. He begged the gods. He summoned healers. He wept, not as a king, not as a demigod, but as a friend. And then Enkidu died. The walls of Uruk could not contain Gilgamesh's grief. He tore his robes, his hair, his soul. The man who had once feared nothing now feared everything. For in Enkidu's death, he saw his own. Consumed by dread, Gilgamesh left his kingdom behind. He wandered deserts, crossed mountains, and faced beasts, seeking one thing, immortality. He searched for Utnapishtim, the one man granted eternal life after surviving the Great Flood. After trials and pain, he found him. But Utnapishtim told him what no warrior wants to hear. You cannot escape death. Still, he offered a glimmer of hope, a plant deep in the sea that could restore youth. Gilgamesh dove into the dark waters, braved the currents, and claimed the plant. He had it. He could live forever. But as he bathed on the riverbank, a snake slithered silently, drawn by the plant's sweet scent. It devoured it and shed its skin young again. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, empty-handed, older, wiser. He stood atop the city's walls and finally saw, not his power, but his people, his legacy, his city that would outlive him. And so he carved his story into clay, so that long after his bones had turned to dust, the world would still whisper the name Gilgamesh, king, warrior, friend, and above all human.